All right, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Dallin Hardy, who I'm very excited for. He's going to speak not only to the effects of nutrition on ADHD, but very specifically to his proprietary blend of broad spectrum micronutrients and their effect on ADHD. And I'm going to do this interview a little differently because Dallin actually has a very rich, peer-reviewed um, plethora of data that he has accumulated over the last couple of decades on the effects of his micronutrients on different disorders, including ADHD. And I just really want to make sure that we get as much of that in as possible. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dallin so he can present some of the data that he's accumulated.
Thank you, Justin. So, yeah, at Hardy Nutritionals, we got more research than we can present. It's always a struggle for me to talk to clinicians and know which papers to talk about. So, let me just share my screen here. I went through and selected just the ADHD literature that we've got, and see, you should see this my screen now. There's the present thing here.
See it?
And I'm just going to move our little box around. There we go. So yeah, the what Hardy Nutritional specializes in is mental health, and I'm a product development scientist at Hardy Nutritionals, and do a lot of technical work here. Talk with a lot of clinicians. Also talk with the manufacturing and quality assurance side of things, and formulating. But the broad spectrum micronutrients is what we're going to talk about, and I'll define that in just a bit here. But first I wanted to talk about, is there a way to minimize this? There is. So there we go. I wanted to talk about just nutrition and ADHD in general, because I feel like, everyone acknowledges that nutrition is important to health. And I talk to people in the mental health field all the time, clinicians as well. And, surprisingly, clinicians in traditional medical schools don't get a ton of nutrition training, but they know it's important. And so there's this sense that it's almost like a cliche, trite thing, like, of course, nutrition is important, but practically what that means, what can someone do nutrition wise, just becomes this mystery after that. And so, what is the most impactful thing someone can do if they have a mental health deficit in terms of nutrition? What's going to make the most impact? Even if you say, okay, diet's important. Well, which dietary changes are going to be significant? And if supplementing can be beneficial, well, which supplements and how which one to use? And then there's this idea that especially a lot of clinicians have, that just nutrition as a treatment, a standalone treatment, it's not capable. It's something every patient needs to address, but in terms of a therapy standalone treatment, it's not capable. And we're gonna show you that it can be. So the product that I'm going to be talking about today, the formula, the micronutrient formula, is branded as Daily Essential Nutrients at Hardy Nutritionals, and we have various powders and capsule versions of it. And it's really the core of the Hardy Nutritionals business. Sorry if this sounds more like business. We'll get to the research in a minute, but you have to know what you're talking about. And it's actually, when you read the studies, because they're done in academic institutions, they're all independent and not funded by us, other than we donate the product when it's in a research study. But all the funding for the trials are through grants that the researchers at the universities get, the regular way they get funding. And so the research articles, when you read them, they're pretty clean. And so clinicians are often really frustrated, like, what's actually being talked about here? Broad spectrum micronutrients. What is the actual product? That's what matters to practice. So that's why I have to show that. And there's a lot of literature that I'm just summarizing, sort of general responses to daily essential nutrients, what it's good for, cognition, energy, anxiety, stress. There's a bunch of studies on that. Mood and mood stability. Those are two distinct things. And so, depression and bipolar might be examples of that distinction. Emotional dyscontrol is the pathological term. Emotional control is what daily essential nutrients would give. Attention and sleep. And for this, particular audience, the research that we have on this particular formula, it's actually changed slightly over the years since it was first developed by the founder of Hardy Nutritionals, David Hardy. But it's substantially similar formula. Anyway, attention is most relevant to this. So a little bit more about what it is and what broad spectrum micronutrients mean. So broad spectrum really means comprehensive. Micronutrients means nutrients that we need in our bodies in relatively small amounts. Now, that's all relative. The macronutrients are like protein, fat, carbohydrate, water. Micronutrients are vitamins, minerals. That's essentially what they are. So the vitamins and minerals is what it really focus on supplementing, and that gives therapeutic effects just by itself. But it's comprehensive. The body. I'm a biochemist. That's my formal degree is biochemistry, and metabolic pathways are really complex and they're interconnected, and nutrients are inputs all over the biochemistry. And so supplementing one nutrient, although it's easy from a scientific point of view to look at one thing at a time, from the body's point of view, it's not a match. Like if you want something that meets the body in its complexity, you've got to be comprehensive. And so and daily essential nutrients is quite unique among supplements in all of these things. Probably maybe the least unique of these 4 points is the comprehensive. There are other multivitamins that have all the essential vitamins and minerals in them. This one has all the essentials, plus in the proprietary blend, a bunch of antioxidants and trace minerals too. So it's very comprehensive. So it is unique in that the nutrient form, we process our minerals ourselves to make them more bioavailable. And we use some special forms of the vitamins. So that there's nutrient forms are unique. The balance is super unique. I'm a formulator, right? So I look down the percent daily value column of supplements, and a lot of supplements are formulated to nice even numbers in the percent daily value, and that gives you an idea of what they formulated to. Well, we formulated to a whole bunch of research, and a whole bunch of internutrient ratios. There's balance that nutrients exert in the physiology that you can imbalance if you just supplement a ton of one nutrient. You can cause an imbalance of another. A classic example, maybe it's only classic to me and most people don't know about it, but like it's well published in the literature anyways, I'll say that much, is the zinc copper ratio, for example. There's calcium, magnesium, and a couple of the others as well that interact. But zinc copper is a really classic example where if you supplement too much zinc, you can induce a copper deficiency because they compete for certain transport mechanisms, etc. So the internutrient ratios are really important. It's important to get those right, and getting that right doesn't necessarily match the government's percent daily value column. So you can see the percent daily values are all over the place in daily essential nutrients. That's a reflection of a well formulated supplement from my point of view, not a poorly formulated one. And then the dose. Now, in the clinical studies that we're going to go over shortly, 12 capsules per day is the dose that was studied in all these studies. And so that's the kind of dosing that your 1 a day multivitamin is just not giving. And the recommended intakes for nutrition are really minimums because they're based on how to prevent deficiency diseases. And what we're talking about here when we're talking about a therapy or a treatment is we're trying to not just prevent deficiency in healthy individuals, but to optimize health and recover lost function in individuals who have are unhealthy in some way. And so the amount of nutrition you need is not the same for each of those settings. So hold on just a sec. How do I go? I'm going to have to escape and start this. Yeah, I forgot to introduce it. So I'm just going to share this again with so I'm going to introduce our founder, David Hardy. He formulated this and he shares in this little clip. I just wanted to show it because it focuses on the concept of broad spectrum, the comprehensive nature of this. he uses an analogy that makes it really intuitive and makes it, why this approach to nutrition, supplemental nutrition, is so powerful. So let's start this again. Can you hear that? Can you hear him, Justin?
I can't hear it now.
Oh, well, maybe
I hear it a little bit in the background. We can't hear it clearly.
It's really quiet, huh? Well, maybe this will not work very well. I might just have to. Let's try this. I turned up my sound.
Oh, now I can't hear it at all.
Okay. Well, I'll just sort of present it myself, and I could send you the clip too.
Yeah, if you send me the video, I can cut it in too.
Or you have the slides.
Yep.
But so the comprehensive nature, the essential nutrients are obviously foundational in the body's structure. But so I talked about recommended intakes being, sort of minimums, because they're based on preventing deficiency, not optimizing health. But even with that paradigm, it's really scary to see how much of the US population is not meeting the RDA. Based on the NHANES data, which is a big Harvard study, they did lots of dietary analysis, and it published in the early 2000s. That's probably the best comprehensive US population-wide estimates of essential nutrient, micronutrient intakes. And this is from that data, and I don't think diets have improved significantly since then, but from that data at that time, this is the percent of individuals. Here, let me just present this bigger. Oh, no, there's too much sound with it. So I'll just zoom in. This is the percent of individuals not getting the recommended dietary intakes, which again are targeting the prevention of overt deficiencies. So you can see some of these things, like vitamin E is more than 3/4 of the population. Same with calcium and folate, and magnesium is almost that much. So a lot of deficiency in it. And then if you take that amount of that suboptimal nutrition intake, because RDA is sort of like a minimum for healthy individuals, supposedly. That's what they estimate from the literature. And you superimpose that on a dam, say, and pretend that that's holes in the dam. You can see how important it is to supplement all the nutrients together. Because if you just sort of identify the most deficient nutrient and then you supplement it, you'll see some benefit, but it'll probably just be, all you can measure is the difference between that and the next limiting nutrient. And it's not until you plug all the holes in the dam and that you see the whole effect of holding water. Anyway, that's better presented in video.
Love that analogy.
But there are other analogies like this, like Dr. Dale Bredesen. He's a big integrative clinician out there. He has a holes in the roof analogy, and there's 36 holes in the roof, and you got to plug them all. So there are other analogies that get at the same thing of comprehensiveness. So now let's get to the research here. This is the fun part. It's going to get really deep and technical, but I'll bring you along. So there's a story in terms of ADHD that we're going to get at here. First of all, just a quick overview of the peer-reviewed research articles. Again, all of them independent, and these are just the primary research ones. So in research, you got primary research where you do a study and you publish something new. It's looking at actual individuals. And then there's commentaries on that, reviews where you look at a bunch of papers and review all the data together, meta-analyses where you actually reanalyze data from a whole bunch of different studies. Those have all been published on this formula, daily essential nutrients, but this is just original research. So there's 3 double-blind placebo-controlled trials, randomized controlled trials, 2 of them in ADHD, 1 in adults and 1 in children. So, and then there are other randomized controlled trials not blinded. Blinding just means the researcher and the participants don't know if they're getting active or placebo, and it has a placebo control. And the placebo comparison group. And then there's observational study, a whole bunch of observational studies. So this is without randomization. I should turn this off. Without randomization and without placebo control. but it is like a clinical setting, and you can observe before and after sort of thing. And so there's some safety studies, some mechanistic studies published, and there are 4 double-blind placebo-controlled trials, randomized controlled trials, which, by the way, that study design is the strongest, considered the strongest type of study you can have, because it's got a sham treatment against the real treatment. And so the placebo effect, people expecting to get better, you get that from both groups, and so on and so forth. And we're going to focus on the ADHD in here, and there's ADHD studies in all of these camps. We have enough high quality studies, the double blind randomized controlled trials, that I'm really just going to focus on that. So I'm going to take you through a sort of research journey in micronutrients for ADHD, starting with these are the dates of publication. So the studies were going on before that, but in 2014, double-blind randomized placebo-controlled trial in adults with ADHD. Many of the adults recruited for that study also had comorbid depression. Comorbid just means it's happening at the same time. So it's a diagnosis that could be given. You qualify for 2 diagnoses. The primary one is ADHD, and you have depression comorbidly, or together with it. And then the researchers also took advantage of following up with these people after the intervention, which was an 8-week study, at 1 year, and seeing how many continued taking the daily essential nutrients formula and how they were doing. And then the researcher, that was good results. And so she studied the same formula in children, and a similar thing, except with children, instead of a lot of the kids with the ADHD diagnosis also having depression, it was more emotional dysregulation. So a lot of the kids had, it's still mood related a lot, and behavior related issues, in addition to the classic ADHD diagnostic criteria. So, and then in 1 year follow-up, she followed up with them too, and she took a lot more biological samples, urine, blood, fecal samples, and analyzed those too. So a lot of good data came out of that study. And then there's one, I'm putting 2021 on here because it's in peer review right now. Another a replicate study to the one in children with ADHD and emotional dysregulation, larger study, and done in several universities in North America. That one's in peer review right now and will be published soon. The researchers tell us the data is good. I still haven't seen it. But they did publish a little preliminary excerpt that looks really good. So I'll show you that. So this is in adults, okay? Double-blind placebo-controlled trial in adults. And this is, this is what I love. I'm a scientist. So we're getting to the data. So the dose of this this was a previous version of the daily essential nutrients formula that wasn't quite as potent. So you think capsules, 12 is a ton of capsules. Well, we didn't used to be able to fit that much nutrition in that many capsules. The same amount of nutrition at this time in published in 2014 was required 15 capsules per day to deliver. So we've gotten a little bit more space efficient since then. There's like no filler in our capsules. It's all active. But the 15 capsules per day, 5 capsules 3 times per day was the dose used in this study. So that's equivalent to 12 capsules, 4 capsules 3 times per day, which was done in all the later studies that we'll talk about. But in studies, they identify, outcome measures. And before they run the study, they have to solidify the study design so that there's no bias from things that they see during the study. It's all set out beforehand. And so they identify primary and secondary outcome measures. So primary outcome measures in an ADHD trial are always the ADHD diagnostic symptoms. And then they also identified this MADRS is a depression score. And then everything in bold over here is significant. So again, you can see that there's ADHD, and some of these scores are broken down into inattention and hyperactivity, impulsivity. Those are the 2 sort of subcategories of ADHD. And so you can see that and then they have self-report and observer and clinician data. So this is going to be sort of a theme going through. You got primary symptoms that are being checked for ADHD, hyperactivity and attention. And then you've got secondary outcomes that are, capturing more of the clinical picture for these people beyond the just strict diagnostic criteria. And for example, this GAF down here is global assessment of function. So that's where a clinician is just giving a more broad overview as to the ability of this person to function in their life, and that was one of the significant ones here. So these adults with ADHD, and a lot of them had depression coming in to the study as well, mild to moderate depression. It just knocked it out of the park. So self-report data was significant. The participants themselves with ADHD really felt improvement in 8 weeks. This was an 8-week study, in attention and hyperactivity impulsivity. The observers, so this would be like family members, and stuff. They thought hyperactivity impulsivity was significant. Clinicians, it actually didn't quite make the cut for statistical significance on the core ADHD diagnostic criteria on these particular rating scales, but global assessment of functioning was much improved. And if you look up at the top here, clinicians' global impression. So this is the clinician's overall impression of improvement in ADHD symptoms. And so this is a relative measure now between the placebo and the active. And by comparison, it was very significant. Same with the clinical global impressions. So the clinician's overall impression of their improvement, aside from the ADHD diagnostic criteria, just their overall improvement, both in ADHD and overall, much improved over placebo. Very noticeable difference between the groups, and even on the core primary, core ADHD symptoms, the self-reported and observer were significant with clinicians, not quite. So you can't claim it's a treatment for ADHD because clinicians on the core diagnostic criteria were not 100% significant, but a lot of significance in the outcome measures. And these are standard rating scales that it really, that many of the outcome measures are significant. It's really quite impressive study. And the data can be broken down in a couple different ways. So lighter color is more improvement. So you can see there is this difference between the bars, the micronutrient group on the left and placebo group on the right. There was a noticeable difference, and this was measurable in the statistics, like the chart we just looked at, that there was more benefit in the micronutrient group over the placebo group. And this is just in 8 weeks. So this on the right is a graph about the depression in these adults. And although it's not ADHD, a lot of them had mild to moderate depression. So for those who entered the trial moderately depressed, then those who got the micronutrients, the broad spectrum micronutrient daily essential nutrients formula, were significantly improved in their depression compared to those who got placebo, just for that subset of participants who had the depression along with the ADHD. So what I like to do with studies is try and, because in a double-blind study, you've got this whole group of people, and overall there's statistical significance, right? And it had an impact. But there's more to the story than that, because among those, there were some that were not responders and some that were. So the key when you want to know is this going to work for me is try and figure out, what predicts a responder among these people that were recruited. First of all, what was the recruited population like? What did they look like? Do they look like me? And that will give me some idea of how likely I am to respond to the same thing, right? So the research actually published, they looked at blood data to look at predictors of response. And unfortunately, it would be nice, I know, everyone likes to, everyone hopes that we could just test for nutritional status and then know from that what is going to, what we need and what's going to make a significant difference to us. It turns out, though, that the body regulates blood levels of nutrients a little bit, and they may not reflect the tissues, actually, in some cases. And so that might be one reason that there wasn't a huge effect here. They conclude that the results suggest that serum nutrient levels, so that's blood nutrient levels, have limited value for identifying who will respond to treatment. They were a little bit disappointed because there were three things, the three correlations in blood markers that they thought were significant. One was greater ferritin, which is a marker of iron status. So people that entered at baseline, so that means people that entered the study having better iron status were more likely to be responders to the daily essential nutrients formula, ADHD responders. So that's the core ADHD symptom. So I don't know if that means, iron status is important to ADHD, or just iron status is important too when you add daily essential nutrients, it helping you with your ADHD. That's what this would indicate. Also, in terms of depression and global functioning, people with low vitamin D at the outset, which has gotten a lot of attention, and rightly so, in this last year, but lower vitamin D at the outset, those people were more likely to improve in depression and global functioning. So that shows some evidence that more vitamin D is helpful for those particular outcomes. If that doesn't particularly target ADHD, at least there was no correlation in this particular data set. It was for depression and global functioning. And then lower copper levels at the outset, that predicted a greater response in depression and clinical global improvement outcome measures. Again, not ADHD, but if people were low in copper, the supplement containing copper was helpful. In non-nutrient variables, they looked at other things, and the only thing that was significant was people with a history of developmental delays. So like slow to walk, read, toilet train, those types of things. That was a significant predictor of response. So those people were more likely to be responders to the treatment instead of non-responders. So, and on this side over here, it describes the characteristics of study participants. And you can see that ADHD, the typing of ADHD, they typed it into primarily inattentive or primarily hyperactive, or combined, like sort of an equal mix of the two core sets of symptoms for ADHD. And you can see it was a lot of inattentive and mixed, not a lot of solely hyperactive type ADHD, like primarily hyperactive. And then there was a lot of, and this is number of people and then percent in parentheses. And so there's, 50, 60% of people had of the participants had depression. So that's quite a bit. 50% in the micronutrient group, and just the way they randomly assign people to the groups, right? That's why it's a randomized clinical trial. The way it worked out, there was between 30 in the placebo group and 50 in the other group having an anxiety disorder or multiple anxiety disorders. There was even some there. Bunch of alcohol use and so on and so forth. So these are the types of things. Oh, look at this at the bottom, expectancy of treatment. So right at the outset, there was about 5%. This is mean and standard deviation, not number and percent. So 2 out of 42. So maybe like 5% of the people in each group, placebo and active, thought that it would work. So,
Wow.
so placebo effect wasn't a big, at least by their reports. Most people thought it wouldn't work. These were adults. They probably tried lots of things for the ADHD up to that point. And so there wasn't a lot of expectancy for it to be beneficial. So hopefully that means placebo effect wasn't a big factor here. But so there you go. I sort of walked you through a study. Hopefully that's fun if you haven't done that before. And hopefully it isn't taking too long here. But so there, like I said, 1 year later, there was a follow-up to this randomized controlled trial. And this one, I'm just going to summarize really quickly what came from that. So those who stayed on the micronutrients for the full year, they had better outcome measures than those who switched to medications or discontinued the micronutrients. And cost was the most substantial reason they reported for stopping if they stopped. So those were the significant things in that follow-up. I'll go into more detail in the follow-up to the children's double-blind study in that, and it'll give more insights. But I do want to summarize from that adult ADHD study. There was a lot of comorbid or together with ADHD diagnosis, the ADHD, core ADHD symptoms. There was a lot of mood dysregulation, right? There's a lot of depression, specifically in that group. And taking all the literature, all the studies that have been done on the daily essential nutrients formula, a lot of them are like bipolar disorder and depression and anxiety studies. So there's a lot of um, mood improvement there, and so I think based on our observations with our customer base as well, I think that you're especially uh, you're more likely to be a responder to daily essential nutrients, to respond well to it as a treatment for ADHD, if you have those types of comorbidities as well. I think that there's enough evidence in the literature taken as a whole, plus in the fact that these populations, in that adult study, there was a lot of that, and the results of that study were significant. I think that might indicate that. So the same research lab was really excited. They got more grant money, and we donated more product to sort of duplicate that in children. And by this point, we had fit the same, roughly the same amount of nutrition into 12 capsules. And so substantially similar formula, but 12 capsules instead of 15. So 4 capsules 3 times per day was the dose. 12 capsules total. And this was the outcomes from that. You saw from the title that aggression and emotional regulation were what they featured in the title. There was more significant things than that, but and we'll talk about those here. So the primary and secondary outcome measures, the clinical global impression of improvement. So overall improvement, according to the clinicians, was significant. Like these are children ages 7 to 13 who were recruited. They had to have inclusion criteria. They had to join the study. They had to have a diagnosis of ADHD, but they could also have other things. And overall, the clinicians noticed a difference between the placebo and the active group in overall improvement. And then specific to improvement of ADHD, this was significant in the adult trial too. And that was significant. All the bold ones are significant. The mood, clinicians' impression of mood improvement was significant. Those are both quite significant p-values over there. And what these p-values mean, the reason they bold the p-values is, for those who aren't versed in statistics, a p-value is as the probability that this could happen by chance, just randomly. So if it's a really low number, 0.0 something, then it's a very unlikely. What that means is statistically, it's very unlikely that this just was happenstance. Like it was, and by the flip side, you can infer then that it was very likely that it was due to the treatment, like the intervention somehow, right? And so that's what the statistics means. So clinicians also, these are all clinician measures, global assessment of what's GAS? It says it down here. Child Global Assessment Scale, yeah. So again, this is an overall functioning type of measure. These are the things that were really, really responsive. And then when you look at the ADHD, core ADHD symptoms, you can see inattention. They didn't bold this because they usually define 0.05 as significant. And that means, basically a 5% chance that it was random, that it was a random chance effect. Then if it's less than 5% chance of being a random, finding, then that's supposedly 95% chance, right? That it was due to the treatment, and that's significant. This wasn't quite significant in terms of total numbers in the trial, but this little d here, it says, hey, it was significant based on per protocol. And what that means is there were some people that joined the trial that didn't make it all the way through. So there was a couple of kids that dropped out in both groups, placebo and active. Maybe 12 capsules per day was a little daunting, I don't know. But they don't explain why. I think they might explain why they dropped out, but I can't remember it. And so what they're saying is, hey, when you include everyone, we had to include the scores of these kids at the point they dropped out. So if that was early on in the study, there wouldn't have been much improvement. But the people who completed the study, in other words, they completed the protocol. So based on per protocol analysis, if you analyze the data just based on who completed the protocol, this actually was significant. So the researchers do report later on in the paper, and I'll show you that inattention was actually significant on this. This is clinician rating. So this is official core ADHD criteria at 12 capsules per day in kids. The inattention portion of ADHD was significant. Hyperactivity was not. And then we saw in other types of outcomes, aside from the core ADHD symptoms, we've got a significant one here in parent conduct problem score. Every parent is going to be happy to hear about that one. Like, you can solve some conduct problems with this treatment. That was significant in 10 weeks. This was a 10-week trial. And teachers, they also got teacher ratings. And there's an emotional control scale where that was very significant. Teachers were like, wow, and they're just filling out the standard questionnaires. And what the data showed from before to after was a big difference between the active micronutrient group, broad spectrum micronutrients, and the placebo in emotional control of these kids. So again, I think you see this underlying effect that these micronutrients are having doesn't maybe seem to be direct to ADHD core symptoms. Although, well, I shouldn't say that because per protocol analysis was significant in this. So I can say scientifically that the inattention part did respond of ADHD, but it's clear that these micronutrients are improving function of these kids in a more comprehensive way that affects their ability to control their behavior and their emotions. And the overall impression that clinicians get about them is really significant. All the clinician improvement rating scales and global assessment of function are all very significant. So, that one red circle should be around the 0.055. I don't know why that slipped down after I made it. So this just shows sort of the same thing, but in a more visual way, and it selects a certain number of the significant things. So here, remember how per protocol analysis, in other words, those who completed the 10-week trial, inattention was significantly improved in the core ADHD symptoms, and hyperactivity wasn't. If you look at the two bar combinations in the middle here, the dark is the active micronutrient and the light is the placebo. You can see, it becomes very visual. You can see that, oh yeah, there's a huge improvement in inattentive symptoms in those. So a higher bar means higher percentage of the kids improving, and significantly improving too. So it was defined as much or very much improved. So 47% on micronutrients were, this is global functioning, sorry. I'm talking about inattentive. So 32% on micronutrients versus only 9% on placebo showed a substantial change in inattentive symptoms. If you look at just global functioning, this is a clinician rating of just overall functioning, that's the one that's 47% on micronutrients and only 28% on placebo. And it's common for a placebo group to improve somewhat in a trial just because they're getting attention and focus, and plus the placebo effect and the expectancy effect they didn't report in this one. So I don't know how much these kids expected to improve. It's maybe a less reliable measure in kids than it is adults, but the placebo effect. But you can see the mood outcome measures too, which daily essential nutrients seems to really knock out of the park. So attention, global functioning, and mood, that's sort of the story here. And across clinician, parent, and teacher rating. So the authors concluded here, there's some good quotes I just couldn't leave out. So they point out early on in the paper that ADHD conveys a risk for a bunch of things. I'm sure nobody likes to review this, but in the research literature, there is documented correlations, and that's what they call a risk. First, school failure, going less far in school, doing less well in school, occupational problems, substance abuse, incarceration, and other types of psychiatric problems. So this presumably would be mood-related stuff in addition to ADHD, despite treatment. So in spite of standard of care, medication treatments. And they talk about how there's a lot of research that also documents pharmacological treatments can reduce symptoms, but are often unsatisfactory due to side effects, and people don't want to continue them for their preferences. So in contrast to that, they point out management of emotional dysregulation presents a considerable therapeutic challenge for parents, teachers, and clinicians. And these are measures that, even more than the attention part of ADHD, was really lots of significant measures on these things. Many parents commented that their child was calmer, more able to be reasoned with, and happier. And these improvements bode well for improving those life outcomes that ADHD increases the risk for. And so, in addition to the symptom improvements, there was the safety was good. It was well tolerated, even 12 capsules in these kids, right, in 10 weeks. And they recommend a treatment here. This could be a significant treatment. And apologize for that phone ring. We've been working from home, and so I've got a phone system on my laptop, and I forgot to turn it off.
Okay.
So again, who's more likely to respond? And I think we see that emotional dysregulation, in addition to just core ADHD symptoms, is probably more likely to respond to the daily essential nutrients. Among these kids, there was a lot of little bit of disruptive mood regulation disorder. What's a high number? Generally, it's anxiety disorder. There's a lot of those in the micronutrient group. Oppositional defiant disorder, in both groups, there was a lot. So a lot of sort of behaviorally defiant kids. And again, a learning disability too, which is something that predicted response in the adult study, if you recall. So we're seeing sort of a picture of cognitive, impaired cognitive function, maybe in this learning disability group, and behavioral emotional dysregulation. Among the kids that entered the study, very few of them were just solely ADHD, diagnosis described them fully. There was more what they call co-occurring disorders. And lots of people some people, about a third, maybe had tried medication in the past. Again, this is number of kids and then percentage in parentheses. So that was that study, and the researchers did a follow-up on this one as well, and this one's a little more interesting. I'm going to go into it in more depth, and we're almost the end of the research here. So 1 year later, what happened? These kids that were in this study, there was significance for attention and a bunch of other things overall in the group, differences between active and placebo. But who continued taking it and who didn't, and how did that work out? Well, and again, this isn't like an experiment. This is just observational data, just naturally what happened. They just sort of characterize it. So it's considered less strong evidence, but it's in a way, it's like practically speaking, it's really engaging, I think. So the continued the daily essential nutrients treatment was about a quarter of the original study participants, and about a quarter of them switched to medications. And they report what that was. They were able to follow up with almost all the kids, so that this is a really good follow-up study. And it was overwhelmingly switching to ADHD meds. Methylphenidate was the most commonly prescribed. And then there was about 40% of the original study participants that at a year later, after the 10-week study, they weren't taking anything for their ADHD. And then a bunch of the kids were on a combination of medications and micronutrients or other things, and those were excluded from analysis because it wasn't a clear group. So those are dominant treatment groups. Okay, so there was a couple different categories of what was statistically significant here. One is what group they fell into. So what determined which of those groups, the daily essential nutrients treatment or the medications or the no treatment at all group, why did they go into those groups? Well, it's kind of intuitive. The first statistically significant finding they found was that those still using daily essential nutrients at 1 year were more likely to have had a better response in the original 10-week trial. Okay, well, that's pretty intuitive. It worked for you, so you keep on it. Those still using daily essential nutrients at 1 year were also more likely to have tried multiple medications unsuccessfully prior to entering the original clinical trial. So that's an interesting thing to have analyzed. It looks like in this particular group of kids, the kids that stuck with daily essential nutrients had tried more medications before ever joining the study. And that's an interesting thing to be significant. Obviously, they went for, I mean, it wasn't because they just, I don't know. I'll let you ponder about that. But then now the other type of significant outcome that they analyzed was about effects. So different, this is what's really interesting, right? Between the groups, what group was doing better than the other group. So both the medication group and the daily essential nutrients group scored better on core ADHD symptoms than no treatment at all. Well, that's maybe not surprising. What's interesting, you remember that attention was significant in the first 10 weeks. Hyperactivity impulsivity scores, so that other subset of the ADHD symptoms in the kids that were responsive, so in the daily essential nutrients group, and then they stayed on that for a year, that became significant as well. And what's more, it was improved more in that daily essential nutrients group than the medication no treatment group. So maybe just the hyperactivity impulsivity part of ADHD just takes longer to respond, and it would have been significant if the trial was longer than 10 weeks. But but the daily essential nutrients treatment actually did affect that, and it was noticeably better than the other groups, even the medication and the no treatment at all. So, and then anxiety scores were significantly lower in the daily essential nutrients group at 1 year than the medication group and the no treatment group. And what's interesting here is the medication group actually scored significantly higher on anxiety questionnaires. So the researchers conjecture that maybe those stimulants were inducing some anxiety because they seem to worsen on anxiety ratings from end of trial to a year out. So, and then depression ratings were significantly better. Again, this isn't surprising. We saw it in the adults with ADHD study. Depression ratings were significantly better in the daily essential nutrients groups than both the medication and no treatment groups. And again, what the clinicians think about these kids, the clinician assessment, and there's a standardized questionnaire for this, the clinician assessment of overall functioning was significantly better in the group that stayed on daily essential nutrients for a year than those who switched to medications or discontinued treatment at all. So this is really amazing data, and there are multiple high quality studies on this. We're really excited for this one to get published. In 2019, the end of 2019, the replication of this double-blind trial in kids with ADHD, they published some preliminary data from the open label phase of the study. So what they do in these studies is, to be ethical, they give a treatment for a certain amount of time. So 8 weeks for the adult study we went over, 10 weeks for the child study we went over. This was, I think this one's a 10-week trial in kids again. And so they give treatment versus placebo, and nobody knows what they're getting. But then, to be ethical, so that everyone has access to the treatment for another 10 weeks, so the same length as the experiment, they allow everyone access to the active. So they give everyone the micronutrients. And so they know that part of the study is not blinded. They know what everyone's getting. They know everyone's getting active. They know they're getting the micronutrients. And so although the experimental data in the 10-week study, there has to be more data analysis, and you have to unblind it, analyze the data, and then unblind it and see how, what was significant. But for the open label study, where they just gave it to everyone, they could measure improvements in that part already. And so they published this back in 2019, and the completed experimental portion is in peer review right now. I'm really excited for it to come out. But in the open label phase, there was a significant decrease in attention and hyperactivity. This is a 10-week open label thing, and oppositional defiant disorder, and disruptive mood dysregulation disorder. So again, it's hitting the behavior and mood components. And this one looks like it might be, this study might show significance in both attention and hyperactivity. So this would be then nailing the core ADHD diagnostic criteria, which would really bring it into the realm of an ADHD treatment. So I think it's something that people need to check out. If if well, I should share what some clinicians are saying too. But if it looks like you might be a good responder, there's really no downside and side effects, and and a lot of clinicians are starting to think that have experience with their products, because most people find, nutrition and micronutrients in this particular formula after they've gone through a lot of, allopathic conventional medicine where they try lots of things and they're unsatisfied with the results. It would be nice to sort of switch that around, because if you are a responder to this, the outcomes are so dramatic and significant that it nails it. And then if you're not a responder, then go try the medications and stuff like that. So that would be a great thing to switch around.
Yeah, we couldn't agree with you more there. I know we're coming towards the end of our time, so I really want to just get to follow up on that and saying that it really is impressive to see this data, especially because so many parents do go from medication and then, or maybe they're trying to avoid medication and then go to supplements, but there's so much conflicting data around what supplements to take and what amounts to take. So to see this proprietary blend and to see the effects is really incredible to have all that data.
I'm going to stop sharing so we can just talk about it now. But yeah, it really is. It's amazing. It's amazing that we got early on in the when this formula was developed. A researcher at an academic institution saw some pretty dramatic results in someone and got motivated to research it, because that's given us independently funded and professionally done at university published research that is really compelling. And what's I love about it is that it's capable as a standalone therapy, and it's a distinct thing. Like, it's a distinct nutritional thing you can do, and they didn't even do any blood analysis to know which nutrients these people needed. Like, there's no guessing which nutrient, because you're giving them all, and you can just sort of, it's such an easy way to start, and it doesn't work for everyone, obviously. But the response rates in those studies were very good. Like, if drugs were put on the market with those response rates, they would be the best drugs on the market. There are drugs that get marketed with basically safety profiles reviewed, and efficacy is like, well, there might be something there, and so we're going to allow it because it's not too harmful, but by their measures. But this is so, it's such an accessible thing, and it's not overwhelming. You don't have to change all your diet. Like, there's no diet change in these kids. We do find that it is a sort of a gateway drug to a better lifestyle, though, and especially because for people who are responders, it frees them up from the disorder symptoms, so they're more capable of changing their lifestyle, right? And they've seen the power of nutrition, and then they're more motivated to improve diet and other things. So it is I've talked to some dietitians who are like, I don't want people just relying on supplement and then don't change the underlying lifestyle issues that they have. And that's really not what we've seen. What we've seen in people that respond well is it's the other way around. Once they see the power of nutrition and they get some of their faculties working more capably, they're way better positioned to change their lifestyle.
That's amazing. And like you said, there's really no negative side effects to this. I mean, worst case scenario, hopefully you get some of those mood benefits that you outlined, and
the side effects are positive improvements in mood. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate your time, Dallin. After our original talk, I personally, went and ordered your supplements. I wasn't aware of them before. And I know my partner, who's a doctor, is going to be reaching out as well to see if she can promote them in her shop here in Hawaii.
We do clinician training. So I do clinician trainings. We when we have in our account creation on our website, we have people self-identify as health professionals or not, and we chase those health professionals down and give them as much education as they're willing to take. So
that's amazing. And I just want to remind everybody that there's a link on the Summit website on Dallin's page to Hardy Nutritionals, and you can order there. Dallin, I really thank you for your time and for all the information you shared with us today.
It was a lot. It was drinking from a fire hose, especially if you're not, reading scientific papers all day like I am. it can be a little daunting, but hopefully, maybe you have to watch it a couple times, but hopefully I presented it clear enough and it came through. So
The data is very compelling. So thank you very much,
all
Dallin.
right, you're welcome. Thank you for your time, Justin.